diesel range with no heavy ends at all, just pure distillate. Very, very high quality oil. And a large amount of natural gas and LPG produced at the same time as the oil. So this seemed like a golden opportunity for Mongolia, because Mongolia doesn't have either natural gas or LPG and imports almost all of its transportation fuel. So here in one deposit, just one oil shale rock, you're able to generate fuels and gas that fill all of Mongolia's needs. So we started exploring really in earnest then, and we're very excited about the potential here.
And it's just not just in the Gobi region, isn't it? It's just all, if you look at the landscape of Mongolia, it's pretty much everywhere.
The basic trends were there were a set of rift valleys that went east-west across the country. They filled in roughly around 130 million years ago, and the climatic conditions seemed to be very widespread. So it was really a wonderful period for the generation of this organic matter that filled up these lakes. But then after that, there was a set of tectonic movements that squeezed the lakes so that not all of them stayed high quality. So the exploration of the basins, of which there were many, many here in Mongolia, it's going to take a while. But my company is really experienced at doing that. So we'll be evaluating which are the best basins in which to produce oil from.
In terms of reserves, how much of the reserves, if you look at it honestly speaking, based on your studies, how much of the reserves are actually recoverable? That actually makes economic sense. You know, not that doesn't cost that too much, but you know, from a business perspective.
I don't know the answer to that yet, but that is very high on our list of things to do. You should bear in mind that for Mongolia's needs, just 1 or 2 billion barrels, which is something of the order of a square kilometer of rich oil shale, is all you need. The oil shale is the densest fossil fuel reserve on the planet. When you find it, it comes in very thick layers. So here we found 300 meters of thick oil shale, and that means that a production pilot of 50,000 barrels per day, which is more than Mongolia needs today, but let's say Mongolia's needs will grow with time, so we do the first commercial project at 50,000 barrels per day. That only uses up 1/10 of a square kilometer per year. 1/10 of a square kilometer. I mean, that's like that. So, and the reason it is because it's so rich and so thick that it really is, you don't need a lot of it. Now, once we have that production online and Mongolia is energy independent, the question then is, how much do you want to export? Because you have a natural market to the south in China, desperate for fuels, and you have so much oil shale here that I would imagine after we get our first production pilots going for Mongolia, that we'll then move into an export mode. So in a sense, the message is it doesn't really matter how many hundreds of billions of tons of rich oil shale you have. You have so much that you're going to be energy independent and you're going to be a major, major exporter. And it's going to happen soon because it doesn't take a really big effort to do the in situ technology. It's been done for a long time. The drilling is well known. The heating technology I've developed over 30 years, and it's something that will go quickly here.
And in terms of, let's say, from today and up until the point where the production starts, how many years are we talking about? Practically speaking, of course.
We're talking about around 2019 would be the first stage of our first commercial project. So we would be producing 2,000 metric tons of oil by 2020, and then we'd step up to 4,000, 5,000 metric tons a few years later, 2 years later, and then to 6,700 metric tons per day by 2026. And that's the equivalent of 50,000 barrels per day. And when I say fuels, I'm talking about gasoline, jet fuels, and diesel, and the corresponding natural gas and liquefied petroleum gas. So about 2/3 of the production is as liquid transportation fuels, and about 1/3 as gaseous fuels. Now the natural gas, of course, is great for heating, reduction of CO2, and for making electricity. The LPG is something that's very hard to import, but we should be making it at very low prices, so we'll make that available in the country, and that will dramatically lower the CO2 and smog and particulates that you get from burning coal, for example, in a gare, and then all the transportation fuels. So in a sense, this is really the answer to many of Mongolia's problems, from both the environmental aspects and the economic aspects, the jobs that we'll be creating here. There's about, we think we'll have approximately 5,700 jobs created in this 50,000 barrel per day production. So jobs and high-paying, technically advanced jobs, not mining kind of mining jobs.
Okay, we'll of course come to that point in a few moments, but before that, let's talk about Genie oil. It's in the center of attention by signing a strategic oil shale development agreement with the government of Mongolia.
Yes.
And how basically you foresee the development is going, and basically the company proposed the technology, the in situ.
Yes.
What about the technology? Can we honestly say, look, now we had the discussion with the government, sit down, they understand us, you understand them, and the technology is there. Can we understand that everything is settled then?
Well, we have signed a joint exploration agreement with the government. It's over approximately 20...
The reason I'm asking this question is basically, is that if there is anything that is holding the process back, or there is something that is proven to be more challenging? Because you see in Mongolia, where there are investors basically looking to explore further opportunities, but the government understands and sometimes they don't. That's basically the argument. Is there anything that is actually proven to be more challenging?
Well, there is, in the sense that the petroleum law of Mongolia the present one does not actually include oil shale in it. It talks about petroleum but not oil shale or any of the unconventional hydrocarbon. Because back in the 1950s, when the law
which wasn't surprising, basically.
Yeah, it didn't exist, so it never made it into the law. So one has to come up with the appropriate legal framework in order to handle the oil shale. And I believe the petroleum law is in the process of being updated to include it. Associated with that is various fiscal terms that are different for oil shale than for conventional petroleum. And so one really has to sit down with the economic ministry to understand the best way to work the fiscal terms for this type of resource. But in every other way, it's been relatively easy to move forward here. We've been exploring the area, and basin by basin, we're basically mapping out where the best reserves are.
And in terms of, I'm just not trying to create a hype or anything that is surreal, basically. Because for the last few years, there has been a hype related to the mining industry, of course, and with the possibility of Mongolia becoming energy independent, just because of Genie oil or the technology that is related to exploring this carriage, and it seems wonderful, as you've pointed out. It's a tremendous opportunity to.
Well, it is. And it will happen. It's one of these things where I think there's such a need here in Mongolia and such a means towards fulfilling the need just sitting here, that it's in everyone's best interest to move it forward as quickly as possible. So there's a lot of excitement in the government, and we're gradually getting the message out to the public that this really is an opportunity for the country, one that people really didn't know about a few years ago. So it's exciting.
We've tried to create this beautiful picture related to how Mongolia could obviously develop and become energy independent. But what about the downsides, if there is any, of course?
Well, anytime you do a large project like this, there's bound to be a certain amount of surface disturbance. We will be drilling a large number of wells, oil wells, and so it behooves us to study the hydrology, to study the air quality in the area, and make sure that our process doesn't negatively impact either the air, the water, or the surface. Now, we've done a number of pilots and projects in other countries, and so we know how to evaluate these things, and we know how to be protective of the environment. One good thing about this, as opposed to mining, is that because it's such a small area, because it's so rich, and because there is no surface disturbance associated with mining, that it's very easy after we've produced the oil to basically remove the wellheads and resod and reseed the surface, and you're back to your initial surface conditions. That's one of the reasons I've liked this way of producing the oil shale. There have been older methods used years and years ago where one mined the oil shale, put it in big furnaces, and cooked it in the furnaces, and then after the oil came out, you were left with all the spent oil shale. These were put into piles, and gradually they leached in the rain, and it was really very bad for the environment.
So the new technologies,
the new technologies are much better, much better. And so we, all of the gases that come out are clean. And the amazing thing, I really have to point this out, of all the oil shales I've studied in the world, when you pyrolyze oil shales, you generate a lot of sulfur, H2S. And this has to be cleaned up, turned into elemental sulfur, because you can't emit H2S to the environment. The Mongolian oil shale is so low in sulfur that it doesn't seem to make H2S. So the handling of the air emissions is so much easier than in any of the other oil shales that I've worked on in the world.
And what about initially? Well, I mean, it's.
So it sounds amazing, and it sounds too good to be true, but it is true. Mongolia has lucked out.
We're glad that we're actually discussing that on our channel, so it's great. And well, I mean, the question I'm interested in is, now we have this, too good to be true reserves in Mongolia, and the technology that is promising, and again, very good. But what about the funding, for example? How much of the external funding and financing you're hoping to bring in, basically?
So,
because if you look at the size of the project, it is too big to handle.
Well, it is and it isn't. Genie Energy is a U.S.-based company traded on the New York Stock Exchange and has a market cap of about $250 million. And has several subsidiaries one of which is Genie, Mongolia. But there's also the AMSO is a subsidiary, and it's working on oil shale in Colorado. There we have a partner, a 50-50 partnership with the French company Total. And we also operate in Israel. And we have a number of partners so that in the early stages, that is the pilots and the first phase of commercial, we probably will be entirely self-funded. In later phases, we will need some capital because the 50,000 barrel per day project will require roughly about $1 billion to get started. And over a period of like 30 years, one would have invested about $4 billion. But the cash flow comes relatively quickly, so that your negative cash flow never dips below about $1 billion. So that's basically what's needed for the main project. And the goal is basically to partner and to raise the capital to do that. I don't think it's going to be difficult. The economics are very compelling, and the reserves are so large that I think after one does the demonstration pilot, and it's clear to everyone the quality of the oil and the recovery efficiency and the lack of environmental damage associated with it, I think the funding will be relatively easy to develop at that stage.
Are you not worried about that at some point the feasibility study would come out negative in terms of its whether it's to do with the environment or whether it's to do with the workability of the project or anything?
Well, I sure hope not. Am I worried about it? The answer is no. I've been through enough of the projects already to know that this is not on the lower side of the oil shale developments. This is the highest. This is the best